Hello and welcome to day 4, Understanding Labels, part 1. We're going to break this into 2 different parts because it can be a little overwhelming if you haven't really processed through what really is on a label before. And so we're going to try to make this as simple as possible so that it's not too overwhelming in one day. I thought it would be a little bit fun to take 3 cereals that are commonly eaten and compare their labels so that you could have something that you could relate to and maybe be a little bit familiar with and be able to recognize some of these things. So, I want you to see if you can guess what cereal it is by the end of each slide as we're comparing these and looking at labels. Also, quite frankly, when it comes to understanding a label, it's usually on food that is processed and at the grocery store or somewhere that you're trying to do something a little bit more quick and convenient. And so starting to understand what to look for can be very helpful. So most of us have been taught to A, look at calories, B, look at the total fat content. Quite frankly, most people have been taught to decrease their fat content, which is highly unfortunate if it is healthy fat. Total carbohydrates is definitely more common now that people are getting more keto friendly and aware. But what we're really wanting to consider is how these things are impacting the daily value and really what they mean on a health basis. So the daily value is set up approximately on a 2,000 calorie diet, and it's set up by the FDA. So take it for what it's worth. When I'm looking at a label, the first things that I'm starting to look at are actually the fiber. Fiber is one of the nutrients that we are most deficient in. It's critical for healthy digestion, and it also helps to slow down the processing of your carbohydrates. So the higher something is in fiber, the slower you're going to process those sugars, because the next thing we're going to look at is sugars. Quite honestly, usually sugar is the first thing I look at above any of the other things, because fat does not make you fat. Sugar is what's going to make you fat. And sugar, ultimately, if we wanted to put it into its simplest form, especially added sugar, is a poison in many ways to the body. So decreasing our sugar is one of the top things that we want to be most concerned about when we're looking at a healthier alternative when reading labels and looking for convenience. And then next is going to be our protein, because protein is, when we take a step back, when we're looking at really the healthy dynamics of a diet, we want actually a diet very high in healthy fats, because fat is going to sustain energy and help you burn fat better than any other nutrient profile. Next is going to come protein. Protein is also going to be very helpful for helping to sustain energy, but not as much as fat. And then next is carbohydrates, which is where the sugar comes into play. Carbohydrates are necessary. You do need to have carbohydrates in the diet. Carbohydrates tend to burn more quickly, and you're going to run through them a lot faster, and especially if it's a simple carbohydrate or something high in sugar, then you're going to experience that high and then that drop in the low a lot more frequently, and that's when you develop a cycle of actually becoming addicted to sugars, is because without even realizing it, many of us use sugar as a drug. And so you'll get the high, and then you'll get a low, and then you look for another high carbohydrate food to bring us back up. Then definitely it is reevaluating our relationship with fat. Fat is so critically important for a healthy body, but it's making sure that it is a good and healthy fat, which can be very challenging to find when you're looking at ingredients and processed foods. So, when I look at a label, first thing I usually look at is the sugar. Second thing I usually look at are the ingredients, and then I'll circle back to if I feel like the fat, the sugar, the protein, and the fiber outweigh really typically what's in the ingredients. So in this particular cereal, we've got sugar as our second ingredient, which means it's higher on the ingredient list. So if you didn't know, ingredients are listed in the order that they arrive in the product, as far as this product has more whole grains than anything else. The next most used ingredient in this product is sugar. Then the next most ingredient is oat bran. One of the things that they do that's a little bit tricky is they'll break sugars into multiple types of sugars so that it spreads out that ingredient profile, but ultimately they still are all sugar. Then this one is going to have brown rice syrup, also honey. These two are, so when you start getting into syrups, as far as sugar is concerned, you're starting to concentrate it. So that's definitely not the ideal for your health. It's going to be most beneficial if it's in its natural source, like a cane sugar, a honey, a pure maple syrup. Something like that is going to be more beneficial if you were to pick something that had sugar than something that's starting to turn into a syrup from a sugar. So brown sugar syrup is going to start to follow that path, but the ones we're really skeptical of are like corn syrup or high fructose corn syrup. If you see either of those, you definitely want to drop it like it's hot, because those are when they truly start to become a poison in the system. Next thing we're going to notice on here is canola oil. So going back to our fats, fats are critically important for our health, but the ones you absolutely want to try to avoid are vegetable oil, canola oil, and soybean oil. So if you pick up a product that has one of those in it, you're ideally going to want to put it back down. When we get into vitamin and minerals, that's going to be on part 2, so we won't get into that too much until tomorrow. Any guesses on what this might be? Cheerios! So, your overall, hopefully healthy cereal, looking at Honey Nut Cheerios. Alright, on to our next one. In this one, we see our total fat is 3 grams. Our dietary sugar fiber is 2 grams. Sugar is 9, so we have a little less sugar in this one. Protein is 3 grams, but then when we go over to our ingredients, we see our sugar listed. Oh, dang it! We've got canola oil as our oil, so that's not going to be very helpful. We've got corn syrup, a double whammy. We definitely do not want corn syrup. Molasses actually is going to fall under that healthier category. So along with our honeys, our pure maple syrup, molasses is one of the most unprocessed forms. So that one's not going to be so bad. Honey also a pure form. Caramel color can get a little bit sketchy depending on how that's being put into the product. It's just going to be another additive basically that we don't necessarily want to have to filter out with our systems. Artificial flavors, that always is a little bit of a scary one as well, because artificial flavors can mask a lot of different things, some of them being things like MSG or things that are generally toxic and unhelpful to the body. So that's going to be a red flag in our ingredient list. And then BHT is added to preserve freshness, also found to be pretty toxic to the body, so not a great preservative. If we would have noticed back with the Cheerios, they were using vitamin E, so a synthetic vitamin nutrient, as a preservative, which is going to be a better alternative to something like BHT. Any guesses what this one is? Honey Bunches of Oats with almonds. Still considered a healthier cereal, but we're starting to realize pretty quickly the one thing this one had going for it was less sugar, but a lot of things in our ingredient list that are not very helpful. Alright, last one we're going to look at today has 15 grams of fat. So immediately I'm going, whoa, that's pretty cool. And now that you've kind of started to uncover some of these things quickly, we're going to look over at our ingredient list, and that's going to tell us what type of fat are we using. Swing over there, and oh, whammo, we're using coconut oil. So that is exciting. Got a lot of fat coming in here, and it's coming from healthy things like coconut oil, and our top ingredient is almonds here. So we're hopeful on this one. Dietary fiber, going to be 5 grams, so pretty high in fiber. Going to help us with processing our carbohydrates and our sugars. 12 grams of sugar. We're still a little bit high on sugar. 9 of them coming from added sugars. So we're more concerned about the added sugar than we are about the total sugar, because it looks like there could be some of that coming from maybe the cranberries or the cherries in our ingredient list, but still got a little bit of sugar coming in here. And protein, 6 grams. So decent amount of protein, especially if we're looking at from a cereal perspective. Then, you guys are getting quick at this now, I know it. Start going over to our ingredient list, and our first sugar is organic maple syrup. So we've got a cleaner form of sugar showing up for our first sugar, which is still a sugar. So I want to reiterate that sugar is not always ideal no matter what form it's in, but at least in this one, when we're starting to identify these in an ingredient list, we're recognizing that they're using a cleaner and a healthier sugar in this particular cereal. We've got sugar listed again, so they've got it in here a couple times. We know that this has a little bit of sugar in it, but still a regular form, which is helpful. In between here, we're also seeing that we've got the almonds, the dried coconut, which is also one of our fat sources, our pumpkin seeds, organic coconut oil. So we're getting a few different sources of high nutrient dense foods, which is great. Then in our sweetened cranberries and cherries, unfortunately, is that they are sweetening their cranberries and their cherries. So being aware that that's going to be another add of sugar. Also the glycerin. Glycerin is an actual an alcohol sugar, or not terribly unhealthy, but the body has a difficult time processing glycerin. So when you're just being informative, you're realizing that it's not going to be as difficult on the body as like the BHT preservative that we were talking about, because ultimately that's what the glycerin is for, is preserving the fruits, but it still is a form of a preservative. Showing up with the cherries as well. And then we've got brown sugar syrup again here. It's at the very bottom of our list. It's not going to be in a very high concentration in this form, but still they're using a brown sugar syrup. It's going to be better with the overall ingredient profile than the other two, but still being aware that that is what they're using and that is what you're bringing in the system. And then again, using vitamin E as a preservative, which is going to be better than something like the BHT that we saw. Any guesses on what this one is? Coming in for a third one, the Morning Summit cereal. When we look at the 3 of these one more time, what we're starting to notice is that our fat content, when we look at our healthier cereal, Morning Summit, had 15 grams of fat compared to 2. We're going to sustain energy much better on the Morning Summit cereal. It's going to give us a longer burn. Definitely going to be healthier from that perspective. Also, this one's using its fat is canola oil, so it's going to be a fat that's going to be toxic to the body and going to go rancid in the system. This one also had 12 grams of sugar, but their sugar and their brown rice syrup, or brown sugar syrup, is showing up much higher on the list. And so when you're starting to understand labels and comparing them, recognizing that although these two both have the brown sugar syrup, which would not be your ideal, it's showing up much higher on the list in the Honey Nut Cheerios, which means there's a higher concentration and more of that being used here compared to the pure maple syrup being used on the Mountain Summit. And our protein is less. So those are all of the things that when we're comparing and starting to understand labels, we recognize, oh wow, fat's way less on this, dietary fiber's less, sugar's the same, but take a note of this, the added sugar here is 12, so all of the sugar is added here, where on the mountain summit it was added sugars were 9 grams. So some of those are just coming from natural forms of sugar, which is always the ideal, and less protein. So we can start to understand how to differentiate a little bit between products. Then when we pull out our honey bunches of oats, this one, our healthy honey bunches of oats, just got demoted. It's only got 3 grams of fat, 2 grams of fiber. It did have less sugar, but it's coming up with a close equivalent of 8 added sugars, where the Morning Summit had 9, and the protein's less. But where this one really starts to drop is in our ingredient profile. We've got sugar. Ultimately, what we're really concerned with is we have corn syrup here, we have canola oil, we've got caramel color, artificial flavors, and BHT. So what seemed like not too bad of a cereal, when you really start understanding labels, this one is one you want to drop off pretty quick. And lastly, our Morning Summit. So the things that we're still wanting to be aware of is that it does have a fair amount of sugar. When we're looking at things that are processed and in the stores, this is going to be something you will be up against. But the advantages that we're seeing here, and how you start to identify what products you're picking versus other products when you are going in a processed route, is that this has, 4 times the amount of fat, and it's all healthy fat, which is awesome. You've got more fiber than in any of the other ones. We've got the same amount of sugar, ultimately, 1 more gram of added sugar than the honey bunches of oats, but less added sugar than the Honey Nut Cheerios, more protein than both of them. Our sugars are coming from purer sources, and we are got a lot of additional nutrient-dense things like our coconut, our pumpkin seeds. We're using a good oil here, which is huge. So hard to find products with a good oil, and this one has coconut oil being used, and it's using a decent preservative of vitamin E. So hopefully that has been helpful with helping you to start to identify what you're looking at when you start to look at labels, and what's going to be most helpful for making those healthy transitions. Hope you have a wonderful day, and look forward to talking with you soon.